Coming up, a decision on the fate of a protester. And later, legislators fight to pass bills.
Chaos off America's coast.
All of that and a profile on multiple vice presidential candidates, along with important dates this week in history, along with making sure your facts are straight.
Also where presidential candidates are during their campaign trails, the latest from polls, and something for you to consider.
Good evening and welcome to The Update, your home for news and politics.
From the local level to nationwide, we're keeping you up to date. I'm Jordan Tovar.
And I'm Johnny Valtman. And Jordan, it's good to be back here in Iowa City. Hope your break was good. And what was going on in Iowa City while we were gone?
Well, Johnny, kicking things off around the Iowa City area, we have a follow-up on a story from November. For the Young Americans for Freedom hosted controversial speaker and self-identified detransitioner Chloe Cole at the Iowa Memorial Union in October. In response, some members of the community came out to protest the speaker in response. In total, 6 protesters were arrested and charged with interference with official acts and disorderly conduct by UI police after a month of investigations. One protester recently had their charges dropped after 6 months of court trials. Tara McGovern was in court on these charges, and after examination of police body cam footage, police stated that they weren't sure if it was actually McGovern or not interfering with law enforcement. Of the 7 protesters arrested, McGovern was the only one not to take a plea deal. Keeping it here on campus, the Young Americans for Freedom plan to host another lecture in the Iowa Memorial Union next week. Paula Scanlon, a former University of Pennsylvania swimmer and teammate of transgender swimmer Leah Thomas, will be giving a lecture titled, quote, "Men do not belong in women's sports," unquote. Scanlon was featured in Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman, unquote. Walsh, if you recall, spoke at the Iowa Memorial Union for the YAF in spring of 2023. Scanlon is set to talk about what she feels is the importance of protecting women's spaces like sports, bathrooms, and prisons. You know, there's always so much going on around the Iowa City area, especially now as the weather gets heating up, Johnny.
Yes, and out in Des Moines, always stuff going on, especially at the beginning of the year. So that's why we're going to be bringing in Cara, who has some state updates for us.
Thanks, Johnny. Iowa lawmakers faced their second legislative deadline this past Friday. This is the second final week this session, so we'll be going over some of the bills that made it through and some that were dropped. One bill that advanced was Kim Reynolds' proposal for an area education agency overhaul. However, this bill could still go through a lot of changes before any final version is proposed, and like we saw after the first final week deadline, the House and Senate each have different versions of this bill. The House proposal would still have AEAs in charge of services for all students with disabilities, and AEAs would continue to receive state and federal funding. The Senate proposal would give individual schools and districts a majority of the funding that AEAs currently receive. Other bills that are still alive include one that would allow school personnel who meet training requirements to get a permit for carrying firearms on school grounds, one that would extend postpartum Medicaid coverage for new mothers, and an amended version of the Baby Olivia proposal that we discussed after the first funnel week. The updated bill would require schools to show students in grades 7 through 12 videos on fetal development, but it did remove a reference to the Baby Olivia video, which is a fetal development video produced by an anti-abortion group. And bills that were dropped include one that would have required students admitted to Iowa colleges to provide proof of their U.S. citizenship. Another one is one that would have prohibited Iowa employers from knowingly hiring, quote, unauthorized alien employees. Each of these bills were met with no small amount of controversy when they were first proposed. And finally, another bill that was dropped would have allowed pharmacists to administer over-the-counter birth control to patients for up to 27 months before the patient would be required to see a physician to continue their prescription. Now, unfortunately, we cannot take you through every single bill that was dropped or passed. This final week, legislative leaders say they passed about 300 bills, with the bulk of those being moved through the House. Over 100 more have also been tabled for later by being placed on the unfinished business calendar. If both chambers said they wanted to save a bill on this list for further consideration, it will be allowed to stay alive past the deadline. And as with the last deadline, even bills that are technically dead now have the potential to crop up again later as amendments to other bills. Jordan and Johnny, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Cara. And Jordan, that was a lot of bills she went through. I can only imagine what it's like at the legislature right now.
Oh yeah, Johnny. I mean, it's just making my head spin thinking about it.
And before we get too woozy, we're going to be sending it out to Jayce, who has some stuff going on around the world, same as it is here in Iowa. There's been stuff going around the country and around the world while we've been gone.
Thanks, Johnny. And starting a bit outside the U.S., Haiti is engulfed in a crisis that is gripping the world's attention. Now, Haiti's history is long and complicated, and I'll focus on it later, but for now, the key issue gripping the nation is its struggling economy and government corruption. At the beginning of March, criminal gangs began revolting in the Haitian capital of Port-au-Prince, raiding prisons and airports while demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry. Henry had been serving as Prime Minister since 2021, when then PM Jovenel Moise was assassinated. Henry was never officially elected, as Haiti's struggling economy and infrastructure kept the country too unstable to hold an election. The current crisis flared up after Henry visited Kenya to request aid to combat the rising gang violence in the country. In response, gang leader Jimmy Cherizier, also known as Barbecue, announced that his group, G9, was uniting with several other gangs in revolt against Henry, demanding his resignation. On March 12th, Henry resigned as the U.S. met with other Caribbean nations in Jamaica to discuss restoring order to Haiti. Henry is no longer on the island, as all airports in Port-au-Prince have been crippled by violence. Police and military members are battling gang members in the capital, attempting to maintain some semblance of safety. And Kenya has promised to send security forces to the nation, but has so far been unable to do so. Meanwhile, the U.S. is working to evacuate American citizens still trapped in the nation's embassy. I'll be back to explain how Haiti got to this point, but for now I'll send it back to Johnny and Jordan in the studio.
Thanks, Jayce. And Jordan, bringing it back here to the United States, we've been looking at presidential candidates, Iowa candidates. Now we're going to be switching it up here.
Yeah, Johnny, I've been kind of curious. Donald Trump doesn't have a running mate yet. Robert F. Kennedy doesn't have a running mate yet, so I'm kind of curious on who's going to be up there for him.
And that's why we're going to be bringing in Ryan Lynch, who's going to be looking at some vice presidential candidates for the Independent.
Thanks, Johnny. And with the presidential field essentially set, we'll start to look at some vice presidential candidates. Independent Robert Kennedy Jr. is set to announce his pick for vice president on March 26th and has an intriguing shortlist of potential running mates. Nicole Shanahan is a lawyer and entrepreneur that seems to be the current frontrunner to campaign with Kennedy. Shanahan is from Oakland, California, and attended the University of Puget Sound to study economics. She obtained her law degree from the Santa Clara University School of Law in 2014. Shanahan founded the legal tech company Clear Access IP that she sold in 2020. Shanahan has shown support for RFK's campaign, donating $4 million to RFK's Super Bowl advertisement. Former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura is another prospect on Kennedy's list. Ventura ran as a third-party candidate, serving one term from 1999 to 2003. RFK has referred to Ventura as a friend, and Ventura has said he would give an invitation as running mate serious consideration. Ventura has made it clear, however, that he disagrees with Kennedy's stance on vaccines. And former Democratic presidential candidate from the 2020 election cycle, Tulsi Gabbard, has also been referenced to as a potential pick for RFK. Gabbard is a United States Army Reserve officer and has also represented Hawaii in the House of Representatives from 2013 to 2021. Gabbard left the Democratic Party to become an independent in 2022 and did not run for re-election. And while there is much speculation as to who RFK chooses, his campaign has indicated that a decision has already been made. While the suspense intensifies, we'll let you know the outcome when RFK makes his announcement next week. Back to you, Jordan and Johnny.
Thanks, Ryan. And one day these presidential candidates, they're going to pick their running mates and they're going to go down in the history books, Johnny.
Yes, Jordan, and when they'll make the history books, as we look this week back in history, there aren't any vice presidential candidates or vice presidents in general, but there are some major events. So first, let's start on March 18th, 1974. The Arab oil embargo against the U.S. was lifted. This stems all the way back to October of 1973 when President Richard Nixon's request to make $2.2 billion in emergency aid go to Israel during the Yom Kippur War. After this also went through a massive inflation as barrels of fuel ballooned up multiple dollars. The price of gas shot significantly up, and due to a lack of fuel, Americans were capped to a certain amount at times throughout the embargo of how much gas they could get. Once the embargo was lifted, President Nixon introduced new energy plans that would make America more energy independent. Since the embargo, the world of oil production and sales has significantly changed. This day in 2003, the United States began the Iraq War to rid dictator Saddam Hussein from power. Operation Iraqi Freedom began in the morning hours with troops from multiple countries as they began their invasion of Iraq. The invasion was quick, and in April, Baghdad fell, ending the 24-year reign of Hussein. The United States wouldn't capture the dictator until December of the same year. Retrospectively, the Iraq War has been viewed in negative light on the United States end. Iraq was invaded with the presumption that the country was housing nuclear weapons. Not one was found after the war. Violence in the country surged after the United States began their occupation. Pollution in the country exploded due to the conflict, and Iraq is still going through an economic recession here in the present. And on March 24, 1989, the largest oil spill at the time on U.S. waters occurred off the coast of Alaska. After crew members and their company Exxon made numerous mistakes, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez ran aground in shallow water in Prince William Sound. Entering the Bligh Reef, the ship sustained punctures, leading to 8 of the 11 cargo holds being open, leading to the draining of 5.8 million gallons of oil. If there was any good to come from this incident, the Coast Guard reported that Exxon, Alaska, and the United States government were not prepared for a spill at that magnitude, bringing to light better practices and plans if, in the case, a similar spill were to happen. Alaska's Governor Steve Cowper issued an executive order requiring tugboats to guide tankers through the reef, and the U.S. passed the Oil Pollution Act, preventing any tanker which has spilled over 1 million gallons of oil from going through the Prince William Sound. And Jordan, going back to vice presidents, while we don't know the vice presidents yet, it seems like we already know the presidential candidates from both parties.
Yeah, Johnny, this stuff was pretty much decided after Super Tuesday, so we're going to send it over to Cara, who has some updates on the campaign trail.
Thanks, Jordan. Super Tuesday may be over, but that doesn't mean that candidates are slowing down. Or does it? Former President Donald Trump has hit a bit of a speed bump on the road to the White House. Individuals familiar with Trump's campaign have reported that the small dollar donors who played a critical role in his 2020 campaign have slowed down on their donations this time around. Small dollar donations are classified as donations of $200 or less, and in his 2020 re-election campaign, Trump raised $378 million alone from small dollar contributions. This made up almost half of all the funds he raised. However, in 2023, his campaign raised almost 63% less money from small dollar donors than it did in 2019. To be fair, the majority of Trump's funds for his last re-election campaign were raised in the final year of the campaign, so he's still got some time. However, he's also seeing a drop in donations from wealthy Republican donors, which could prove to be another obstacle in his path to re-election. His campaign has not yet confirmed how much he raised in February. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden raised $53 million just last month, making it the strongest grassroots fundraising month since the campaign launched. This brings the total for Biden's re-election campaign up to $155 million so far. Biden said in a radio interview that 97% of his donations came from small dollar donors. It's definitely set to be a heated 8 months as the former president and the current president get ready to face off again for the presidency. But for now, I'll send it back to Jordan and Johnny.
Thanks, Cara. And Jordan, with these two presidential candidates essentially locked in, the polls, what are they reading?
Well, Johnny, since our last episode before spring break, we've seen the landscape of the election undergo much change. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley officially dropped out of the Republican presidential race after getting blown out by former President Donald Trump on Super Tuesday. Trump has since secured all the delegates that he needed to win the Republican nomination. On the Democratic side, incumbent Joe Biden might as well have faced zero opposition as he won every delegate possible thus far and has secured the nomination for his party as well. After the dust is settled, it takes us to a rematch of 2020 with Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Most polls have been looking towards this future since the start of the cycle. For months on end, Trump has been edging Biden non-stop in polls. This one from insights company Big Village shows much of the same story. The former president holds a 36 to 32% advantage over the current president. And something else for you to consider in this poll is the emergence of independent Robert F. Kennedy and Green Party Representative Cornel West as third-party challengers. These numbers may seem insignificant, with Kennedy only totaling to 9% and West with only 1%, but definitely keep an eye on these two for the future. Here in Iowa, things aren't as close, however, between Biden and Trump. Trump won Iowa in 2020 during the general election by about 9 percentage points. And if this poll done by the Des Moines Register has anything to say, the gap between the two will be even wider this time. In this poll, Trump holds a 15% advantage over Biden, leading 48 to 33%. And factoring in third-party votes, 15% also say they would vote for a different candidate, but it didn't specifically say what the candidates would be. And Johnny, with this election cycle still ongoing, we could still see the polls change a lot in the coming months.
Yes, Jordan, and with this candidate pool really going down to now just Biden and Trump and the independents, I think a lot of those numbers for some of the dropped out ones, such as Haley and Dean Phillips, it'll kind of condense and we'll get a better picture of what's coming up in November.
For sure, Johnny. And now we're going to send it back to Jayce in the newsroom, where he's going to share with us some conflicting facts that need to be cleared up.
Thanks, Jordan, and as promised, I'd like to clear up some misconceptions about the ongoing crisis in Haiti. With the crisis becoming more prevalent on social media, some have used this as an opportunity to push fictitious narratives, including that this is the result of a failed socialist government or that the people of Haiti are simply less civilized. The truth is that Haiti's issues extend far into history, all the way back to the 18th century, when, inspired by the United States, the slave population rebelled against their slavers and France in 1791. After a 13-year struggle, Haiti finally gained its independence, but in 1825, France demanded that Haiti pay off debts in order to remain free. It's worth noting that the US did not have to do this for Great Britain. The debt, which was equivalent to $20 billion in today's money, was finally paid off in 1947. Until then, Haiti was financially owned by France and the US. Starting in 1915, the US occupied the country for 19 years. Then, in 1956, the US backed François Duvalier, also known as Papa Doc, as president for life in Haiti due to his firm anti-communist stance. In 1971, Duvalier's son, known as Baby Doc, succeeded his father until he was ousted in 1986, stealing $800 million from the Haitian government during his exit. Later, prime ministers were frequently overthrown, and in 2010, one of the deadliest earthquakes in human history struck the island. Nearly 250,000 people were killed. During the rebuilding process, thousands of gangs emerged and began working with the government, leading to the current crisis. In short, there was no one issue that led to Haiti's current troubles. The nation's history is filled with disasters and exploitation that has kept the only successful slave revolt from excelling the way the US did. While the politics of the island can be divisive and tough to discuss, chalking the conflict up to Haitians simply being, quote, uncivilized discredits their history and the lives currently being lost. For now, I'll send it back to Johnny and Jordan in the studio.
Thanks, Jayce. And Jayce has always got us with the facts, but we have a revolving door here on things we want people to consider. So Johnny, I believe it's you this week.
Yes, Jordan, it is me, and kind of hard time trying to think of something, but I thought of something, and I'd like to toss my 2 cents in the fountain of millions. The folks in Washington, D.C. we elected have their priorities a bit tangled as of recently. New approved legislation that could see TikTok ban is a bad look for the people in D.C. While you can debate a wide array on the issue itself, my issue is everything else going on in the country and around the world. These are the same stubborn lawmakers who can't agree on a budget for this country, only passing minor resolutions that push off the inevitability that America needs to know where our money is going. The budget, which includes how much aid we are dishing out to the conflicts across the world, other pressing issues in our country like inflation, and while a social media app possessing its threats of its own, there are plenty of other threats that our country is facing which are truly affecting Americans. Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, and more rely on a solidified budget. If in the case our government shuts down due to the people running it, millions will be affected. We chose those people to power, to represent us, to do what we feel needs to be done. While we may all have different opinions on how things should be done, there is a silver lining that things need to get done. And at this time, I don't believe things are getting done in our nation's capital. Now, after filming this, Congress did finally pass a budget that will get the country through the next year. However, I'm not going to walk back on my statement. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad they got it done, but after taking this long, I can only be skeptical with their actions moving forward with the other issues the country is facing. And with that, we'd like to thank you for tuning in to the update tonight. We'll find all your news and politics.
Tune in next week for more updates from the local level to the nationwide level.
From the update, I'm Johnny Valtman.
And I'm Jordan Tovar. Have a wonderful night.